Hey, how's it going? My name is Gabby and welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to be doing my October wrap-up. And in the month of October, this has got to be one of the best reading months that I've had all year because I read 18 books, and it wasn't because of the quantity of books that I was able to read, but I had some of the best reading that I've had all year because I only had 2 books that I gave 2 stars this month, but for the most part, I really enjoyed everything that I was reading in the month of October. Before we do jump into the rest of the wrap-up, I just wanted to take a second to thank today's video sponsor, which is Book of the Month. Book of the Month is a book subscription service that I've been using for so many years now, like nearly a decade, and their mission is to bring the best new fiction forward. At the beginning of every month, they have 5 or even up to 7 monthly selections to choose from, and it's genuinely one of my favorite days of the month to find out what the Book of the Month selections are going to be, because almost all of the time they're choosing some of my most anticipated books of the year as monthly selections, which makes me very excited. But then also, just as often, I'm always finding out about books that I've never heard of because of Book of the Month, and I think that's just as exciting. I feel like it can be overwhelming to try and keep up with all of the new releases, you know, because every single month there are hundreds and hundreds of books getting released. But that's what I love about Book of the Month, is that they are making those selections so much easier because they are just presenting you with a few options that they think are the best of the best. Plus, they have the best value for new hardcover fiction books, because right now hardcover books, they're getting more and more expensive, and I think if you walk into any bookstore, you're gonna find a hardcover fiction book to be anywhere from like $26 even up to $30. But for a limited time, when you use the code FEAST to sign up for Book of the Month, you'll get your first book for just $9.99. That is so affordable for a new hardcover book. So the first book that I picked for my November selection is going to be Cursed Daughters, and this is one that I've been so curious about because it's from the same author as My Sister the Serial Killer, which is a thriller book that I was a really big fan of, but this one is actually more of a fiction, like a literary fiction kind of book that's about family, and the cover is also like one of my favorite book covers of this entire year, so I knew I had to pick up this one. Every single month, Book of the Month offers a variety of different add-ons that you can choose as well outside of just the monthly selections, and so this month I decided to add on this thriller called Where He Left Me by Nicole Bart, and this is a thriller that I've been hearing some really great things about. I also love that this one looks like it's gonna have a really snowy atmosphere, and it's just gonna be like the perfect thing to read this winter. So these are the 2 picks that I ended up picking up in November, but Book of the Month has so many incredible selections this month that it was really hard to choose. So I highly recommend checking out Book of the Month. Be sure to use that link down below. I did have a few different books that I've DNF'd. Some of these are like temporary DNFs, and some of these are ones that I might come back to in the future. One of the books that I have probably temporarily DNF'd is this one called Aftertaste. I got about 67 pages into this one, and I am really liking it. I just don't think I was like really in the right mood to be finishing this one, because this one is a really unique and interesting story about this guy. Not only can this guy, you know, like see ghosts, but he can also taste the flavors of the ghost's favorite meal, and he has like the ability to like reunite people with their loved ones for one last meal. It's a really interesting concept. I just wasn't quite in the mood for this one this month. I also temporarily have DNF'd People Watching, but I only got about like less than 50 pages into this one. I just wasn't really connecting with either of the characters right away, but I think I'm going to come back to this one at another time. And then a book that I've decided I do think I'm going to DNF this one is Soul Searching by Lila Sage. This is one that I got 82 pages into, and I was really curious about this one, even though I wasn't the biggest fan of this author's like cowboy romance series, but I was curious about this one because this one's described as being like a supernatural romance, and I was like, okay, well, what about this is supernatural? Like, I just needed to know. And after 80 pages in, like, I am just really not vibing with the writing in this. I'm not liking either of the characters very much, and I just don't know if this author is the romance author for me. And this month I was working on a number of different reading vlogs. I actually had 6 different vlogs that I posted in the month of October. It's been a busy month. At the start of the month, I posted this reading vlog where I read some new horror and romance release books, and then I posted 2 vlogs from New York. I took a trip to New York with my friend Gavin. We did one vlog that was in Manhattan where I read a lot of different fall romances, and then I also did a dedicated Sleepy Hollow vlog, which is like one of my favorite vlogs that I've ever made. It's so spooky and so fun. And then I also did another round of like reading some creepy horror books in the dark that I had a really great time with. I also did a reading vlog where I read 5 horror books in order to get a horror bingo, and that was a really fun video. And then I also did another round of like spend a fall day with me. I love doing those kind of like day in the life videos, and I got up to a lot of like really fun fall activities in that video. And then this month over on Patreon, I made 2 Patreon exclusive videos this month. One of them was reacting to The Life of a Showgirl, like Taylor Swift's new album, with my sister. And then the second Patreon video that I worked on this month was actually me trying to predict the Goodreads Choice Awards, at least in the 4 categories that I am the most familiar with. So I was trying to predict romance, mystery, thriller, horror, and then fiction. And so if you want to see that video, I will have it linked down below, because the Goodreads Choice Awards, the nominations should be coming out in just about a week. Like, they usually come out in kind of like early November, and I do want to make a video reacting to the Goodreads Choice nominations questions and seeing like how many I got right. So starting with the lowest rated book that I had for the entire month, that's going to be 8114, which is one of the, creepy horror books that I read in the dark. I read this one on my Kindle, and it is unfortunate that this is the lowest rated book that I had this month, even though I did give this one 2 stars. I did say that this was a generous 2 stars when I read this book, because the only reason I didn't give it 1 star is because I do think there were some really like creepy moments in this story, but for the most part, this main character guy named Paul, he drove me absolutely nuts, because this guy Paul, he has this podcast about his friend Adam that like went missing back when he was in high school. And then his friend Adam ends up reaching out to him and he's like, hey, I'm actually not missing, I'm fine, but me and my mom are like on the run from my abusive father. So can you please like stop making this podcast about us because it's putting us in danger? And then Paul's like, oh my God, like of course, like I didn't know. And so he stops with that podcast, but then there's another situation that brings him home back to his small town. And he grew up in this house where like a lot of like suspicious things were happening in the house, but something else happens to like one of his very close friends in the town, and then what does he do? He decides to make a podcast about it. And for me, it was just like, oh my God, like this guy never learns. Like he's just continuing to expose all of his friends' like darkest things all over his podcast and like exploiting them in a way. And it was just very weird. I also just don't think the writing in this one was for me. Like I just didn't think the writing was very good, and I didn't connect with the characters, that's for sure. Like I really couldn't stand Paul, and maybe that was the point. Like I get that sometimes these characters are written to be unlikable, but Paul was just so unlikable and so annoying that it like kind of ruined the story for me. So this one ended up only being 2 stars. And then another 2 star that I had this month was the Honeycrisp Orchard Inn. And while this book did have some good, fall atmosphere, and at times I thought like the romance that was happening in this book was cute, like it was sweet, but oh my God, this main character was so annoying, and she's the main reason why I ended up giving this 2 stars. I mean, the writing in this book, in my opinion, it was just not good. And it's crazy to me that this is compared to like the Pumpkin Spice Cafe, because I feel like that book gets much lower reviews, but I actually liked the Pumpkin Spice Cafe a lot more than this one. This girl Ellie in this book was just so annoying and so insufferable because she kept talking about dementia in like a jokey way, and it was so insensitive and just so weird and bizarre. I just don't know how this book got published with all of those jokes in the book, because like anytime she would be like, oh my God, my dad forgot about that one thing, is he getting dementia? Or like, oh my God, I need to get my parents tested for dementia because they didn't remember this one little thing. Or like, oh my God, I forgot about this one thing, do I have dementia? Like the amount of jokes about her, like, do I have dementia? Do my parents have dementia? It was so obnoxious, and it happened so frequently that it like really took me out of the book. And I also just think the writing in general just like was not very good. And then one of the lowest 3-star books that I had this month was The Heartbreak Hotel. This is my most recent read out of everything on this wrap up, and this book was just so mediocre. Like it was just fine. I think I expected so much more from this. This story is about this woman named Louisa who is living out in the Colorado mountains with her really wealthy boyfriend, but then he leaves her right at the start of this book, and he leaves her completely heartbroken, and she's like not able to afford this place where she's living on her own. So she goes to her landlord, this guy named Henry, and she kind of asks him if she can open a bed and breakfast in this home, and if she does that, if she can like rent out enough rooms that she can stay there for free essentially. And Henry agrees to this, and then it's kind of a romance between these two as she's starting to get closer to Henry and like understanding more about him, and she ends up kind of making this bed and breakfast almost like a safe haven for the brokenhearted. So like anybody that's been brokenhearted can come to her B&B and kind of like feel seen, feel included. She like does these deep conversations with them because she also does have a degree in like psychology or something like that. So she kind of almost offers them like a therapy of sorts when they're there. I've seen so many people describe this book as being like very emotional and very touching, and like I can definitely see why, but I just don't think the story really worked for me. I didn't really connect with any of the characters, and like some of it just felt so cringy to me and so over the top, and the way that they'd be like, you listen to all of us, but who's listening to you? It was just a little bit cringy for me, so I gave this one a low 3 stars. Like it was fine, but it was very forgettable. Another book that I gave 3 stars this month was We Sold Our Souls by Grady Hendrix, and this is one that I actually ended up really enjoying, so it just goes to show how amazing of a reading month that I had that this is towards the bottom of my list. But in this story, we're following this woman named Chris, and she used to be the lead guitarist in like a really successful band back in the 90s, and now the story's taking place around like 30 years later, and she's working as like a night manager at this like seedy motel, and she's just kind of like wondering like where her life went off the rails and like how it got this bad. Then one day everything everything changes in her life after this shocking act of violence, as the premise says. Her life starts to change after that, and she's starting to realize that maybe the guy that was the lead singer of their group, Terry, she's starting to think that maybe he sabotaged more than just the band, because he kind of like left the band in the dust and he went on to have this amazing solo career. So she's starting to think that there was something more sinister happening there. And this book was such a wild ride. I do think I enjoyed the first 50% of this book more than the last half of the book, because it just kind of went off in a direction where like I wasn't as invested in the plot. This was such a fascinating read, and I feel like Grady Hendrix has such a specific style when it comes to his horror. There were a few scenes in this book that were so incredibly gruesome and gory that I will never get out of my head. But at the end of the day, I only ended up giving this one 3 stars because the ending just kind of fell apart for me just a little bit. But I do agree with people that say this kind of reads like Daisy Jones and the Six, but make it horror, mostly because you're reading about this rock band where there's like a lot of drama amongst the members and a lot of gossip and a lot of fallout. Then I also do think there's a lot of similarities to this book that I can pull with like K-pop Demon Hunters, at least with the way that we talk about how like music can really save us and like music is the thing that connects us. And I really loved that about this. And then another 3-star horror book that I had this month was The Haunting of Payne's Hollow by Kelly Armstrong. And this was actually the only book that I ended up reading while I was in Sleepy Hollow. But this was actually the perfect book for me to be reading while I was in Sleepy Hollow, because even though this one technically takes place in Payne's Hollow, it still takes place in upstate New York. And then this book also talks a lot about the Headless Horseman in Sleepy Hollow. And this book does a lot of comparing like this small town to Sleepy Hollow and kind of saying like, well, they have the Headless Horseman and we have this. And in this story, you're following this character named Samantha, and right at the start, her grandfather dies. And in his will, he basically leaves her this lakeside property in the town of Payne's Hollow. But she has a lot of weird history with this town and she doesn't know if she ever wants to go back. But in order for her to get this lakeside property, she's gonna have to stay in the town for an entire month and go and stay at this house. And as she's there at the house, there's some really weird, unexplainable things happening. And this book had really, really good atmosphere in like the first half of it. It was just so spooky, and I really loved the way that this character would like struggle to figure out if what she was seeing was real or if she was going crazy herself. But then this story really fell apart for me in the second half of it, because there were things that happened that just felt a little bit like cringy and like not that scary. And the second half of this book, at least in my opinion, it read a lot more like a mystery thriller as opposed to a horror, and that's just not really the vibes that I was expecting. So this only ended up being a 3-star, but for the most part, I really did enjoy my time reading this one. And then another 3-star that I had was The Hounding. This is another horror book that I actually really did enjoy for the most part. This one is like a historical kind of horror book that takes place in the 1800s, and we are following a bunch of different people who are living in this small village, and these villagers believe that these 5 sisters are turning into dogs. Yeah, the premise for this one is pretty weird, and I think that that's my biggest critique with this book, is that I wanted it to get way more weird. I don't think this book is nearly as weird as it could have been, and I think with the premise like that, you know, like I was just really expecting things to get a little bit more strange. But something that I liked and disliked about this book at the same time is that we never get the perspective of any of the sisters, because there are 5 sisters who these villagers believe are turning into dogs, but we never follow from any of their perspectives, and instead we get the perspective of 5 random villagers in the town. Like some of them are men, and this book is really about, you know, like men's fragile egos and how like men will like try to make women feel bad for like not smiling at them. It's definitely that kind of story, and I really did appreciate like the message and like the commentary and like the feminist themes in this book. I just think I wanted so much more from this, and that's why I ultimately ended up giving this one only 3 stars. I do think this was still like really well written and really interesting. I just wish I connected with it a little bit more. Alright, and now for some of my 3.5-star books that I had, getting a little bit higher into my ratings. The next one I wanted to talk about is this book called Blood on Her Tongue, and this is another horror book. You know, much like The Hounding, this one is also kind of like a historical horror that takes place in the 1800s, and also like The Hounding, this is another one that follows 2 sisters. And this one actually really surprised me because I have read another book from this author earlier this year that was called My Darling Dreadful Thing, and I didn't really like that one. I think I gave that one 2 stars, so I went into this with some very low expectations. But Blood on Her Tongue ended up being such a good time. I think this book was so well written, and I really loved the sister relationship in this book. And I love that one of the sisters, she's worried that her other sister, like something's clearly wrong with her. Like she's mumbling a lot, she's not eating, she has these weird fevers. And the doctors are basically declaring that she has some kind of like temporary insanity because of the fevers that have been affecting her brain. When in reality, it's like she's turning into a vampire, or she is a vampire, and she's getting more thirsty and more hungry. And because it takes place in the 1800s, they like don't really know what to do about the situation. I'm not always the biggest fan of like historical horror that takes place in the 1800s. It's not my favorite like go-to thing to read, but I think out of all of the ones that I've read recently, I do think this is one of the better ones. I just thought the writing in this was so good. It was so captivating, and I was very easily able to like lock in when I was listening to the audiobook. Like it just kept me so engaged the entire time, which is not always the case when it comes to the more historical stuff for me. I thought there were a few moments in the plot that were so shocking and so interesting. So I had a really great time with Blood on Her Tongue, and I gave this one 3.5 stars. And then the next thing that I gave it 3.5 stars is Where Are You Really From? This one is actually a collection of a bunch of different short stories. And this one's kind of hard to talk about like genre-wise because I don't really know what genre this would be considered, because in this collection there are 6 really short stories and then there's one novella at the end of the book. And I do think some of them lean a little bit more horror than others. Like some of them feel a little bit sci-fi, some of them feel a little bit like literary fiction. So genre-wise, this one is a little bit like all over the place, but for the most part, I really loved this short story collection. And out of all the short stories, I think my favorites were actually the first 3 in the collection. There was one called Carrot Legs, Mail Order Love, and You Put a Rabbit on Me. Those were definitely my favorites. And Mail Order Love is the only one in this collection that I gave 5 stars. Like I really loved that one. It actually reminded me a lot of Annie Bot because it's about this guy who like orders a mail order bride. And then the one that I also really loved was You Put a Rabbit on Me, and that one kind of deals with doppelgangers. Doppelgangers is like one of my favorite things to read about, so that was a really fun one. I just really loved the writing in this book. Like the writing was just so good that it makes me want to read everything that this author has come out with. And I love that so many of these stories were like very subtly gay. It just really elevated everything for me. Unfortunately, I wasn't the biggest fan of the novella though, and that sucks because that does take up such a big chunk of the end of the story. That one just wasn't my favorite, and so that's why I had to lower my rating from a little bit higher to be only 3.5 stars, because there were a few in this collection that really didn't work for me. But for the ones that did work for me, oh my god, they were so good and so thought-provoking, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about them. Like this collection as a whole definitely reminded me a lot of like Cursed Bunny, and that's one of my favorite short story collections ever. And then I also read If It Makes You Happy. This is one of the fall romance books that I read while I was visiting New York, and this is one that I've really been wanting to read because I've heard such great things, because it takes place in the year 1997 in a small town in Vermont. I've heard a lot of people compare this to Gilmore Girls, and so many people are comparing this to Gilmore Girls because they said the small town kind of feels like Stars Hollow, which I definitely agree with, but then also because these characters are giving major like Luke and Lorelai vibes, because this guy Cliff, he is a single father of 2 daughters and he runs this bakery in the town, you know, much like Luke has his diner. And then this girl Michelle, she's actually going to be running this inn, you know, much like Lorelai. But the thing that I liked about their dynamic is that they're actually swapped with like the Grumpy and Sunshine dynamic, because you know, like in Gilmore Girls, like Lorelai is definitely Sunshine and Luke is definitely Grumpy, but they kind of switched it in this so that Michelle, she was actually more of the grumpy one and Cliff was actually more of the Sunshine guy. And it was really cute because part of the way that they were connecting was that he was going to be helping her with like her hospitality and like her customer service, because she just kind of has like resting bitch face and she like can't really, like she doesn't know how to talk to people in a friendly way. And so he's kind of like helping her with that throughout the book, which I thought was really cute. I just really loved Cliff's character in this book. Like him as a single father, like he was so cute, so sweet, so endearing. And I think the only reason why I ended up rating this book a little bit lower with only 3.5 stars is actually because of Michelle's character. I just thought she was okay. Like, I don't know, sometimes she could be so insecure and it would like really frustrate me. And like their romantic connection was cute sometimes, but then at other times it kind of felt like a little bit forced or like cliche. I don't know, it wasn't the perfect romance for me, and I think I also rated this one a little bit lower because like, why is this book so long? Like this is nearly 500 pages and I just don't think there's a reason for this book to be quite that long, but I do think it was a very memorable read, and it's also like the perfect thing to read in the fall. Like the fall atmosphere in this book is truly incredible. I also ended up reading the book It's Different This Time. This is another fall romance book that I ended up reading while I was in New York, and it's kind of perfect that I read this in New York because this also takes place in New York. And this one's kind of a second chance romance between these 2 characters. So what I like about this book is that we do get flashbacks of these characters like 11 years ago, with the time that they first met and when they were first becoming friends, and they ended up moving into this New York City brownstone home together. And then now the story is taking place 11 years later when they haven't seen each other in over like 5 years, but they're seeing each other again because something has brought them back together in New York, and they're going to be living in the same house where they once lived together. And I loved the main character in this book. Her name is June Wood, and she's an actress that works in Los Angeles, but she's also going to be doing some stuff in Broadway in New York. I just loved the name. Oh my god, the name June Wood, like that is such an iconic name, but I also just like loved June as a character in this book book. I just felt immediately connected with her. I also loved, you know, like her relationship with Adam in this book was like so complicated, and I actually liked the present day chapters even better than the flashback chapters, because as much as I liked, you know, getting the flashback chapters and getting to see like how these characters, you know, first met each other and how they started bonding in the first place, I do think some of their conversations, like in the past chapters, they just felt a little bit like surface level or like kind of shallow to me. And so I definitely preferred the present day chapters because I thought their chemistry and like the tension between them in the present day was just so well written. I also just really loved like the New York atmosphere in this book and how this book talked about New York, because it's one of my favorite places in the world. And like reading this book while I was actually, you know, on the way to New York was one of the best things that I think I could have been reading. It just really got me excited to like be in New York again. So this was a really entertaining read. And then I also ended up giving around like a 3.75 out of 5 stars to 13 Months Haunted by Jimmy Giuliano, which is very exciting, you know, because this is my book troop book club pick for the month of October. So I'm really glad that this is one that I ended up enjoying for the most part. And this one is about this young girl named Avery. We're actually following from the perspective of this librarian named Piper, and she's kind of like watching over the student Avery because there's been a lot of like rumors about her, because people are saying that her mom is a witch, and people are saying that she's from a haunted house and that whatever was in the haunted house killed her dad and her sister. And so there's been a lot of like weird rumors circulating about this girl Avery, and the young girl Avery is just kind of strange altogether. I don't know, there was something about this. I just really enjoyed my time reading this. I mean, I did read this one in the dark entirely, so I do think that might have contributed to like why I thought it was so creepy at times. But like in my opinion, this book had the perfect balance of like creepy and campy kind of horror. This one also takes place in like the early 2000s and like the late 90s. So I just thought the atmosphere in this was so good, and it made me feel so nostalgic for that time. I don't know, there's something about the way Jimmy Giuliano like writes his horror books, like it just really works for me. And this had one of my favorite epilogues that I've read in a horror book in a long time. Like I thought the epilogue was so fun. So I have mostly only positive things to say about this, but if you want to hear all of my deep dive thoughts on this, I will include the live show link down below. Alright, and then moving along to my highest rated books that I had this month, starting with Spread Me by Sarah Gailey. This was one that I gave 4 stars. Spread Me has got to be one of the weirdest books that I've read this year. Like, I don't even know how to talk about this, but basically we're following this group of researchers who are working in the desert, and we're following this main character who is like the leader of the research group, and she finds this specimen that's like buried deep in the sand, and she decides to break quarantine by bringing this specimen inside the lab when like typically they're not supposed to be doing that. And this story is just so bizarre because it's kind of about how this main character is starting to feel some type of way about this specimen. And yeah, because this story is like so short, I don't want to say anything more than that like plot wise, but this book was so bizarre. It was so well written. It was a very short audiobook because the audiobook is only like 5 hours long, and I was just so locked into this audiobook the entire time I was listening, and I kept being like, what am I listening to right now? Like, what is even happening right now? But in the best way. Like, this book just continued to surprise me and shock me, so I had to give this book 4 stars. Like, it was definitely very strange, but I just love the way that Sarah Gailey writes. Another 4-star book that I had this month is You Weren't Meant to Be Human by Andrew Joseph White. This is another horror book that really impressed me. I've never read anything by Andrew Joseph White, so it was a real surprise to read this and end up loving it as much as I did. And in this story, we're following this character named Crane, and Crane is actually a trans man, and right at the start of this book, he finds out that he's pregnant, which is actually his worst nightmare. But something about Crane is that he belongs to this group called The Hive, and now The Hive is like demanding the child. So this book was just really bizarre. This is another one where like I don't even really know how to pitch this and like talk about it because it's so strange. And I do think there was a lot about this book that just felt really freaking sad. You know, like this book was really sad for the most part, and it had some of the most extreme like body horror stuff that I've ever read. And I think body horror specifically when it comes to pregnancy is something that is very hard for me to read sometimes because I'm like, whoa, I don't know, pregnancy body horror is not always my favorite, but the way that this book was written, it was just so well done. And I felt so much for Crane as a character, and I just felt so badly for him. And this is an Own Voices story, by the way, because this author is not only trans, but also autistic, which is also like Crane. And so this book was just very hard hitting in a lot of ways. And the ending actually like almost made me emotional, which I wasn't expecting either. I just really loved this. Like, I do think this has got to be one of the most like graphic and gory horror books that I've read all year long, but it left such a long lasting impression on me. I also gave 4 stars stars to Play Nice by Rachel Harrison. And I'm so glad to say that I think this is my new favorite book from Rachel Harrison. I've read almost every single thing that Rachel Harrison has put out so far, so like it feels good to find a new favorite from her. And something that I do really love about Rachel Harrison's horror books is that they always feel kind of like lighthearted and fun. And this one definitely has that same kind of like lighthearted, fun feel to the story. In this story, we're following this character named Cleo, and right at the start of this book, her mother passes away, and so she's going to be going back to the house where she grew up in. But the thing is that her and her mom had a really complicated and kind of like toxic relationship, and her sisters don't want anything to do with the house. And because Cleo is like a bit of an influencer, like she decides that she wants to use this opportunity to like remodel the house and like make content out of doing that and stuff. So she's going to be going back to the house, and their mom had actually written this book about the house that they grew up in, and it was like a haunted house type of story. So this book definitely reminded me a lot of Home Before Dark by Riley Sager because of that whole concept of like the parent passed away, but they had written this, you know, book about the haunted house. And in between the chapters, we do get to see some of the book that her mother had written about the house. And I don't know, I just had a really great time reading this one. It was so entertaining. I really connected with Cleo as a character, and there was even like a romance introduced in this book that I actually really liked the romance for the most part. I really like the way that Rachel Harrison writes romance into her horror books, but this one especially just really worked for me. Another book that I gave 4 stars is Coffin Moon. Dude, I'm telling you, I've been reading so much good horror in the month of October. It's ridiculous. And this one was so good. It was one of my favorite books that I've read this month. So this one's taking place in the winter of 1975, and it's taking place in Oregon. We're following this guy named Dwayne who is recently back from Vietnam, and he's a recovering alcoholic who is running this bar, and he also has this niece Julia that he just took in. There's this one guy named John Varley, and then Dwayne tries to start shit with him, not knowing that he's a vampire. John retaliates back against him, and then the story's really about how this guy Dwayne and his niece Julia are like on the road trying to find this vampire. And I just really loved the writing in this book. I thought the writing was so atmospheric and so brilliant, and I also loved the amount of queer characters that we had in this book, and that was also something I wasn't really expecting. I loved the character John Varley. I thought he was such an entertaining vampire character to read about, and like this is everything that I want out of vampire fiction. It was just so moody and so atmospheric, and I really loved the characters. I do feel like this is the kind of story that feels like it's more character driven than anything, and I really loved that about this. I feel like there were so many things about this book that reminded me of Our Share of Night, which is another one of my favorite horror books, and the only reason why I gave this one 4 stars instead of 5 stars is because there were some parts of the plot in the second half of the book that started to lose me a little bit, and like some of the horror elements just weren't really like my thing and like my kind of horror specifically, but for the most part I really enjoyed this and I would highly recommend. And then I also gave 4 stars to Breathe In, Bleed Out by Brian McCauley, and this one is actually a slasher horror book, and I'm so surprised that I love this as much as I did because I don't always love slashers in books. But in this story we're following this character named Hannah, and we learn about how she was recently on this wilderness trip with her fiance Ben, and how it was very traumatizing for her because Ben ended up dying on that trip, and ever since that trip's happened, Ben has really been like haunting her, and she just sees him everywhere and she can't seem to shake him. And so her friend invites her to go on this trip to Joshua Tree, and they're going to be going to this place that's kind of like the spiritual retreat, but then things are not exactly as they seem, and it's kind of like one of those scary things where like people start dying, they don't know what's going on. I just love this so much. Like I had such a fun time reading this book, and the audiobook is only 8 hours long, so it just absolutely flew. I also just loved, there's an author's note at the end of this book that I thought was so great because this author kind of talks about how this book is inspired by Scream and how he just has such a love for like horror movies and slashers specifically, and how this is really like his love letter to slashers. And I feel like when you're reading this, you can really tell because this does feel so inspired by Scream, and I mean that in the best way. Like I do think if you love Scream, you are probably going to love this one. It's just so entertaining and it's very twisty. Like there was a lot of things that I didn't see coming, and it was just so fast paced. Like there was not a dull moment in this book for me, and I loved the atmosphere of like Joshua Tree and like being out in the desert in the middle of nowhere. Like it was very entertaining. All right, and then the 2 highest rated books that I had this month, the only 2 books that I gave 5 stars, one of them was Out on a Limb, and this one is a romance book that I kind of just picked up on a whim. Like I wasn't really expecting to read this one this month, but I'm so glad that I did because I loved this. Oh my god, it's like one of my favorite romance books that I've read this year. And the reason why I was a little bit nervous to read this one is because it involves a lot of tropes that I don't typically like, because right at the start of this book, the first chapter is these characters having a one-night stand the first time that they meet, which is something that I don't usually love in romance. And then the whole plot of this book is that she gets accidentally pregnant with his child, and it's kind of about how they're like navigating that situation and how that is kind of what brings them together, which is also something that I don't usually love in romance. But I think the main reason why why this one worked for me so much is because these characters were absolutely everything, and they were both so cute and so sweet. Something that I loved about this book is that both of these characters have really unique disabilities that I've never read about in a book before, and the author actually said in the author's note that she has the same disabilities as the female main character does in this book. So knowing that it's own voices and that this author's probably, you know, writing about a lot of her own experiences definitely added so much to the story for me. And I just loved the way that these two communicated with each other. Like, it was just so beautiful. They're the exact opposite of toxic. Like, they communicate so well with each other. And I just really appreciated that about this book. I actually listened to this entire audiobook in one night because I was listening to this when I was driving to and from Seattle to go and pick up my sister from the airport. And this audiobook just had me smiling and laughing and like kicking my feet the entire drive. Like, it was just so distracting and like the perfect thing to listen to. And so I just loved it. This was 5 stars for me. It's definitely one of my favorite romance books that I've read this entire year. And then my favorite book that I read this month has got to be Famous by Blake Crouch. I knew that I was going to love this because it's Blake Crouch, and I've loved almost every single thing that I've ever read from Blake Crouch, but I did not know how much I was going to love this, especially because this book is kind of on the shorter side. You know, it's only about like 190 pages, and this one's actually like a republished cover because this book actually first came out in like 2011, I want to say. And this story is about this guy named Lance who is 38 years old, and everybody tells him that he looks exactly like this really popular actor named James Jansen. And so one day after he gets fired from his job, he's like, you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna start pretending that I'm this actor out on the streets. And it's literally about how this guy Lance is kind of like trying to take over the life of this actor. And you know how I just mentioned that I love books that are about doppelgangers? Like, I think that's so much fun. And this book was so ridiculous and so unhinged. It doesn't seem like it really fits into any genre specifically, but it kind of feels like a dark satire. Like, it's very dark comedy. Being in the mind of this character was absolutely hilarious. Definitely reminded me of how I was feeling when I read Julie Chan is Dead. Like, it definitely had that kind of similar vibe where you're following a main character who's trying to like take over the life of somebody else, and they're just absolutely ridiculous, but it's like so entertaining to read, especially towards the end of this book. Like, it just got so unhinged, but like in the best way possible. And I'm just so excited to learn that A24 is going to be adapting this into a movie with Zac Efron as the lead. Like, oh my god, it's going to be so great. So yeah, this was 5 stars for me, easily one of my favorite books that I've read this year. I will have the vlog linked down below if you missed the vlog where I read this one, because my reactions while reading this were truly something else. Like, this book is so ridiculous, but I loved it so much. All right, so those are all of the books that I read in the month of October. And I'm telling you, I feel so grateful that the month of October that I had one of the best reading months that I've had all year long, because I feel like this so rarely happens for me in the month of October, especially with the horror books. Like, I can't believe how many new favorite horror books I discovered this month. But you'll have to let me know, how many books did you read in the month of October? What was the best book that you read in October? Did you find any new horror favorites this month? Let me know all of your thoughts in the comments down below. And thank you so much for watching as always, and I'll see you very soon with another video. Bye.